I want to tell you about the night my parents sat at the kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. and tried to empty an account that had my name on it. I was asleep in my room, 13 feet down the hall. My alarm was set for midnight. Not because I was excited about turning 18, because a woman named Catherine Walsh, a trust officer at First Meridian Bank, had called me 3 days earlier and told me very quietly that I needed to be awake at midnight on my birthday and that I needed to call her the moment I was. She didn't tell me why over the phone. She said only, "There are protections on your account that activate at the moment you become a legal adult. I want to make sure you understand what those protections are before anyone else does." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. But I had been watching my parents for 2 years. I had been noticing things. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms, a folder on my father's desk that disappeared when I asked about it, a comment my mother made at dinner one night that she walked back so quickly, I almost believed I had imagined it. I had not imagined it. At 11:47 p.m., while I lay in my bed with my phone in my hand and my alarm set for 13 minutes from now, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open and my grandfather's account number written on a piece of paper between them. They had been planning this for 8 months. They thought they had timed it perfectly. They thought the account was theirs to take. My grandfather had thought of that, too. Before I tell you what Catherine Walsh told me at midnight, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Maya. I am 18 years old, and until 3 months ago, I had never held a bank statement with my name on it. Not because I was careless with money. Because my parents had been telling me since I was 14 that the trust my grandfather set up for me was complicated and tied up and something we manage for you until you're ready. They said this with the patient expressions of people who are certain they will never be asked to prove it. My grandfather. My mother's father, a man named James Ellison, died when I was 11. He was a quiet man who had made a careful life as a civil engineer, spending 40 years working on infrastructure projects across the Midwest, the kind of work that does not make a person famous but builds things that last. He drove the same truck for 16 years. He ate the same breakfast every morning. He kept a ledger by hand, in pencil, that tracked every dollar he had ever earned or spent. He also loved me in the specific, unhurried way of grandparents who understand that the most important thing they can give a child is their full attention. Every summer from the time I was 5 until the summer he died, I spent 2 weeks at his house in Millbrook. We fished at the reservoir behind the property. We drove to the hardware store on Saturday mornings, and he let me push the cart and ask questions about whatever I wanted. We ate dinner at 5 o'clock every evening at a table he had built himself, and afterward he would sit with me on the back porch and we would watch the light go down over the tree line, and he would tell me things. Not stories, exactly. More like principles. The kind of things a person says when they have spent a long time observing how the world works, and they want to pass the observation on to someone they trust. He told me once, "Maya, the most dangerous thing in the world is an assumption nobody questions. The second most dangerous thing is trusting someone with your future just because they share your last name." I was 9 years old. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was being poetic. He was not being poetic. My parents, Richard and Sandra, were not bad people in the obvious ways. They did not shout. They did not drink. They kept the house clean, attended my school events, and made sure I had everything I needed in the visible, documentable sense of the word need. But money moved through our household in a specific direction, and that direction was always toward my parents and away from everything else. My father had started 3 businesses in the 12 years I could remember. Each one had launched with optimism and a budget I was told was none of my concern, and each one had closed quietly, 18 months to 2 years later. After the third closure, a landscaping company that lasted 14 months. My father said he was taking a break to reassess, and he had been taking that break for 3 years. My mother worked part-time at a dental office. She was good at her job. But the money she earned was not enough to cover the gap my father's assessments created. I understood this in the way children understand financial stress, not in numbers, but in atmosphere. The particular quiet of a house where money is tight. The way my parents' voices changed when the phone rang from a number they didn't recognize. The year my school supplies came from the dollar store, while my friend Layla's mother brought hers from the specialty paper shop downtown, and nobody said anything about it, because saying something about it would have required admitting what it meant. When I was 14, I found a piece of paper in my father's desk drawer. I was not looking for it. I was looking for a stapler. The paper was a printout from First Meridian Bank. At the top, it said, Ellison Family Trust, Beneficiary Account, Maya Chen. Below that was a balance, $112,417. I stood in my father's office for a long time, looking at that number. Then I put the paper back exactly where I found it. I went upstairs to my room. I sat on my bed, and I thought about my grandfather's kitchen table, the one he built himself, and his ledger in pencil, and 40 years of careful civil engineering. He had not said a word to my parents about this money. But he had said something to me, 3 years before he died, that I now understood was not poetic at all. I did not tell my parents what I had found. I waited, and I watched. In the 2 years that followed, I became very good at watching. I watched the way my father talked about the future at dinner, with a particular careful optimism that always circled back to numbers without landing on any specific one. I watched the way my mother sometimes changed the subject when I asked direct questions about money. I watched a folder appear on my father's desk that had First Meridian Bank printed on a tab that stuck out slightly from the left side, and I watched that folder disappear 3 days later into the locked drawer at the bottom. He didn't know that I had seen the account balance at 14. I had never given him any indication that I had, and so the folder moved around his office without any particular concern for my proximity to it, the way people handle things they believe are private in houses where they assume nobody is paying attention. I was paying attention. At 15, I started doing research, not obviously, not on the family computer, not on anything connected to an account my parents could see. I used the computers at the public library on Tuesday afternoons when I told my mother I was at my friend Priya's house studying for chemistry. I learned what a trust was. I learned what a beneficiary meant. I learned the difference between a custodial account, where a parent has control until a child reaches adulthood, and a properly structured trust, where the terms of the trust itself determine who has access and when. And I learned something my father apparently had not bothered to verify before he began whatever plans he was forming in that locked desk drawer. I learned that my grandfather had not set up a custodial account. He had established a formal, irrevocable trust with specific distribution terms. The trust principle. $112,000 at the time of its establishment, now grown with years of interest, was held for my benefit and mine alone. My parents had been named as administrative contacts during my minor years, which meant the bank would communicate with them about routine statements. It did not mean they had withdrawal authority. It had never meant that. But either my father didn't know this, or he was gambling that I didn't know it and that the bank wouldn't catch what he planned to do before it was too late. At 16, the atmosphere in the house changed. My father started a fourth business. This one was a consulting firm, which meant it required no inventory and no physical location, only my father's time and a website. And, it turned out, significantly more startup capital than he had immediately available. I heard him on the phone one evening in the garage. The door was open a crack, not enough for him to notice, enough for me to hear, saying, "The account activates when she turns 18. We have 2 years." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed. I took a very slow breath. 2 years. He had a timeline, which meant he had a plan, which meant whatever I intended to do about it, I needed to have a plan too. The problem was, I was 16. I had no income, no independent legal standing, and no attorney. I had a library card and a Tuesday afternoon and a grandfather who had died when I was 11 and who had, apparently, thought about this kind of thing with more foresight than my father had given him credit for. I wrote a letter to First Meridian Bank. I wrote it by hand on notebook paper at the library, and I mailed it from the post office 2 blocks away so it would not appear on any home account. I addressed it to the Trust Services Department. I explained that I was the beneficiary of the Ellison Family Trust, and that I was a minor, and that I had some questions about how the trust worked, who had access to it, and what would happen when I turned 18. I did not say what I suspected. I only asked questions. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at my home address. My mother handed it to me at the kitchen counter with an expression I could not quite read. Curious, slightly tense, smoothed over quickly. The envelope was addressed to me personally. She had not opened it. Inside was a letter from a trust officer at First Meridian Bank, a woman named Catherine Walsh. The letter was professional and measured, and addressed my questions one by one. It confirmed that the trust was irrevocable. It confirmed that the distribution terms specified that the principal would transfer to my control at 18. It confirmed that no withdrawals or transfers had been authorized from the account to date. And then, at the bottom of the letter, in a sentence that I read 4 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly, it said, "Per the specific instructions of the trust's original grantor, a secondary verification protocol was established on this account. Any withdrawal or transfer request initiated within 90 days of the beneficiary's 18th birthday requires direct confirmation from the beneficiary herself, regardless of who initiates the request. This protocol was established at the time of the trust's founding and is a permanent condition of the account." I put the letter in my backpack. I took it to school the next day. I kept it in my locker for 3 weeks, and then I moved it to the small fireproof box I bought at the hardware store with babysitting money and kept it at the back of my closet behind my winter coats. My grandfather had thought of everything. The 90-day window before my 18th birthday opened on a Tuesday in September. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Catherine Walsh. Before I tell you what Catherine Walsh said to me on that phone call, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been protected by someone who is no longer there to see it? Someone who loved you enough to plan for exactly the worst thing years before it happened? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because we are getting to the part my father did not see coming. Catherine Walsh had a voice that was calm the way certain professionals are calm. Not because nothing is wrong, but because she had learned that calm was the most useful thing she could offer in moments when everything was going sideways. She said, "Maya, I want to introduce myself properly because I think we're going to be talking more in the coming weeks. I'm the trust officer assigned to the Ellison Family Trust at First Meridian. I received your letter last year, and I've been monitoring the account since then." I said, "Monitoring it?" She said, "Your grandfather was very specific when he established this trust. He left a note with our Trust Services Department, a sealed note to be opened only if any unusual access attempts were made to the account during your minor years. We opened it 6 weeks ago." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "What did it say?" I asked. Catherine paused for just a moment. Then he said, and I am reading directly. "If you are opening this note, it means someone has been trying to get into this account before Maya is ready to receive it. I suspected this might happen. Please do the following." She read me the list. It was 4 items. Each one was specific, practical, and had already been executed by the bank's Trust Services Department. Quietly, without notifying my parents, exactly as my grandfather had instructed. The first item was the secondary verification protocol she had mentioned in her letter. Any withdrawal attempt in the 90 days before my birthday would require my personal confirmation by phone or in person. The second item was a fraud flag on the account, meaning that any attempt to access the account outside of normal statement activity would generate an automatic alert to the trust officer on record, which was Catherine. The third item was a copy of the complete trust documents, sealed and addressed to me personally, to be sent to my home address 90 days before my 18th birthday. This had already been mailed. I said, "I didn't receive anything," Catherine said. "It was sent to your home address. You may want to check with your parents about whether it arrived." I understood immediately. I said I would look into it. The fourth item was a name and phone number. A family law attorney my grandfather had retained and paid in advance specifically to represent me. Should it become necessary when I turned 18? I wrote down the name. Harrison Cole, Family and Trust Law, downtown office. I said, "My grandfather paid for an attorney for me?" "Before I was born?" Catherine said. "The retainer was established at the same time as the trust. Your grandfather was a very thorough man." I have thought about that sentence almost every day since she said it. She told me to call her on my birthday at midnight or as close to it as I could manage. She said she would have everything ready. She said, "Maya, I want you to know that we take our obligations to trust beneficiaries very seriously. Whatever happens between now and your birthday, that money is yours. It has always been yours, and we intend to make sure it stays that way." After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Then I called the number Catherine had given me. Harrison Cole's office. I left a message. He called back the following morning, and I spoke to him from the parking lot of my school for 22 minutes, sitting in my car with the engine off and the windows up, watching students walk past on their way to first period. He confirmed everything Catherine had told me. He told me what my parents would likely attempt and when. He told me what the bank was legally authorized to do. He told me that my grandfather had, in his words, written instructions that anticipated nearly every possible scenario with the precision of someone who had thought about this for a very long time. I asked him if he thought my parents knew about the protections. He said he didn't think so. He said that in his experience, people who plan to take something rarely research what's protecting it. They assume the obstacle is simpler than it is. They assume that age and authority are enough. I thanked him. I drove to school 40 minutes late and sat in the back of the second period and tried to look like someone whose whole internal landscape had not just rearranged itself permanently. That evening at dinner, my father talked about the new consulting business, about the clients he was bringing on, about the opportunities that were opening up. He was in a good mood. The particular elevated mood he got when he believed something he had been building toward was nearly within reach. I passed the bread. I said the food was good. I went upstairs at 9:30 and set my alarm for 11:50. If you've come this far with me, thank you. Now let me tell you exactly what happened on the night before I turned 18. My parents thought I was asleep. At 11:15, lying in my bed with the lights off and my phone face down on my chest, I heard the floorboard in the hallway creak. The specific creak, third board from the left, that I had known since I was 5 years old. And then silence, and then the sound of the kitchen light clicking on, the thin line of yellow appearing under my door. I did not move. At 11:30, I heard my father's voice, low, the particular register he used when he was talking about something he didn't want to travel through walls. I couldn't make out words, just tone. Focused, deliberate, the tone of a man going through the steps he had rehearsed. I heard my mother say something back. Her voice was higher than his, less certain. I checked the time. 11:32. Catherine Walsh had told me that the bank's security systems would log any access attempt with a timestamp. Whatever my parents were doing at the kitchen table, it was being recorded somewhere in a server in a building I had never seen, in the same way that everything they had done with this account for the past 8 months had been recorded, logged, and flagged to the trust officer on duty. At 11:42, I heard my father say something sharp. A single short sentence. Then silence. Then my mother's voice, slightly louder. "Are you sure that's the right number?" Then nothing. At 11:47. I know the time exactly because I was watching my phone. The sound stopped entirely. The kitchen light went off. I heard footsteps in the hall, the third floorboard creaking in the other direction, and then their bedroom door closing. I lay in the dark for 3 minutes. Then I called Catherine Walsh. She answered on the second ring. It was 5 minutes to midnight. She was at her desk. She said, "Maya, happy almost birthday. Are you somewhere you can talk?" I said I was. She said, "I need to tell you what happened in the last hour, and then I need to walk you through what's going to happen next." What she told me was this. At 11:19 p.m., an access attempt had been made on the Ellison Family Trust account from an IP address registered to my home address. Someone had logged into the account management portal using the administrative contact credentials my parents had been given for the purpose of receiving statements. They had navigated to the transfer page and entered a destination account number. The transfer request was for $112,842, the full balance of the account. The system had accepted the credentials. It had generated the transfer request. And then it had paused, exactly as my grandfather's instructions required it to pause, because the request had been initiated within 90 days of my 18th birthday and required my personal verbal confirmation before it could proceed. A confirmation call had been automatically generated to the phone number on file for the beneficiary. My phone number. I had not received that call because my phone had been in my hand and I had been watching the ceiling, and my phone had not rung, which meant something had happened to the call. Catherine explained. The confirmation call had gone to a number that had been listed in the administrative contacts as my number. It was not my number. It was a number I did not recognize. My parents had changed the beneficiary contact number in the administrative portal. But the system had a secondary protocol. If the confirmation call went unanswered after 3 attempts, the transfer was automatically suspended, and an alert was sent to the trust officer on duty. That alert had reached Catherine at 11:31 p.m. She had suspended the transfer. She had documented the attempt. She had called Harrison Cole. And she had waited for midnight. "Maya," she said, "I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly before we go any further. You had no knowledge of this transfer request? You did not authorize it?" I said, "I did not." She said, "That's what I needed to hear." At midnight, the moment I turned 18, Catherine Walsh transferred control of the Ellison Family Trust to my name. Not partially, fully, every dollar. The account was resecured under my sole authorization. The administrative contact credentials my parents had held were revoked. $112,842. Mine. Legally. Permanently. I sat in my dark bedroom, 17 years old, for approximately 4 more minutes and then 18, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the specific weight of having been right about something I had deeply wished to be wrong about. My parents had not made a mistake. They had not misunderstood the account. They had deliberately waited for what they believed was the last possible window, logged in with credentials they had no legitimate right to use for this purpose, and attempted to take everything. The bank had been ready for them before they sat down at the kitchen table. My grandfather had been ready for them before I was born. I slept for 4 hours. My alarm went off at 6 a.m., and I lay in bed for a while, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. My father making coffee, the specific sequence of sounds that meant a morning like any other morning. Except it was not any other morning. I got dressed. I went downstairs. My parents were both in the kitchen. My father was at the counter with his coffee. My mother was at the table with her phone. They both looked at me when I came in with the careful cheerfulness of people who are working hard to look normal. "Happy birthday," my mother said. "Thank you," I said. My father said something about going out to dinner that evening to celebrate. He suggested the Italian place on 5th Street. He was using the expansive voice, the one that preceded good moods, generous gestures, the version of himself he performed when something had gone well. I sat down at the table. I poured myself a glass of orange juice. I said, "I need to talk to you both about something." My mother put her phone down. I said, "I know what you tried to do last night." The kitchen was quiet in a specific way. The refrigerator hum became audible. My father said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The trust. I know you tried to transfer the balance last night. I know what time you did it. I know which account you tried to send it to." My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. His first response was denial. Calm, practiced, the smooth surface of someone who has rehearsed this possibility. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said the trust had been managed carefully for years. He said I was misunderstanding something. I said, "Grandpa left a note with the bank. Did you know that? The smooth surface cracked. I said, "He left instructions." The bank followed them. The transfer was blocked automatically. And at midnight, when I turned 18, the account transferred to my sole control. You no longer have any access to it. My mother's hand went flat on the table. My father said, "That's our money. We managed it for you for years. You have no idea what it cost us to." I said it was never your money. The trust was established in my name before I was born. You were an administrative contact. That's not the same thing as ownership. Harrison Cole has explained this to me in detail. My father said, "Who is Harrison Cole?" I said, "Grandpa's attorney. The one he paid in advance to represent me if this situation arose." My father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The performance had stopped. He said, "We needed that money, Maya. You don't understand what we've been dealing with." I said, "I know about the businesses, Dad. I know about the debt. I've been watching for 2 years." My mother started to cry, not dramatically. Quietly, the way people cry when they are ashamed and trying not to be. I did not want to enjoy this moment. I want to be very honest with you about that. There was no part of me that felt satisfaction sitting at that kitchen table, watching my parents understand what had happened. What I felt was a sadness so large, it was almost impersonal. The grief of understanding, fully and finally, that the people who were supposed to protect you had looked at your future and decided theirs was more important. I told them I had spoken with Harrison Cole and that he had explained my options. I told them that what they had attempted was not a gray area legally. Unauthorized access to a trust account, falsification of beneficiary contact information, and attempted fraudulent transfer. These were not minor errors of judgment. I told them I had not decided yet whether to pursue any legal action. I told them that the decision was mine to make when I was ready. I told them I was going to move out. My father said, "Where will you go?" I said, "I have $112,000, Dad. I'll figure it out." I stood up. I left the orange juice glass on the table. I went upstairs, and I packed a bag, and I called my friend Priya, and I drove away from that house for the first time in my life, feeling like the ground under my feet was actually mine. The legal consequences unfolded over the following 4 months. Harrison Cole filed a formal complaint with the bank documenting the unauthorized access and the falsification of my contact information. The bank's fraud department completed its own investigation and forwarded its findings to the state banking authority. My parents were formally cited for unauthorized account access and ordered to appear before a regulatory body. My father's consulting business, the one he had been planning to fund with my grandfather's money, never opened. My parents did not face criminal charges, largely because the attempt had been stopped before any funds were actually transferred, and because I chose not to push for prosecution. Harrison Cole advised me on this choice carefully, without pressuring me in either direction. I made the decision that felt right, which was not the same as the decision that would have felt satisfying. There is a difference between justice and punishment, and I had a grandfather who understood that difference, and I tried to honor it. If someone loved you enough to plan for something you didn't even know to be afraid of, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Now let me tell you where things stand. I rented a small apartment near the university. I enrolled in an environmental studies program. I paid my first semester tuition from the trust account and felt, when I clicked confirm on the payment portal, the particular sensation of a thing arriving that had been traveling toward you for a very long time. My grandfather had set aside $112,000 when I was born. He had built protections around it with the same patient precision he had applied to infrastructure projects for 40 years. Not because he was certain my parents would do what they did, but because he was thorough enough to account for the possibility. He had paid for an attorney. He had written a note to a bank he trusted to keep it. He had built a wall and then built a second wall behind the first one. He died when I was 11, and he had never stopped taking care of me. I visited his grave on a Saturday in May. It was quiet. the kind of quiet that exists in places where people come specifically to be still. I brought marigolds because my grandmother had always planted them around the headstones of people she loved, and I had never stopped thinking of it as the right thing to bring. I sat on the grass for a while. I did not say anything out loud, exactly. But I thought about a hardware store on a Saturday morning. I thought about a man who kept a ledger and pencil. I thought about a porch at dusk and the particular way he had of saying something that seemed simple and meant something enormous. The most dangerous thing in the world is an assumption nobody questions. He had spent his whole life questioning assumptions. And then he had made sure I didn't have to. My parents and I are still working through what happened. My mother calls more than my father does. The conversations are careful and incomplete, the way first conversations after a significant rupture always are. I answer when I can. I am building something. Slowly, carefully, with my own hands and my grandfather's $112,000. And I have not yet decided how much of what I am building has room for the people who tried to take the materials. That is still a question I am holding. My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen with a window that faces east so I get the morning light, a desk where I study, and a shelf where I have arranged my books the way my grandfather would have, precisely, with the spines lined up to the edge, because he believed that order in small things made room for thinking in large ones. On the desk, I keep 3 things. The letter from Catherine Walsh. The first one, the one that told me about the secondary verification protocol and arrived at my house and was handed to me by my mother, who must have wondered, for just a moment, what was in it. The note from Harrison Cole's office, confirming that the retainer my grandfather had paid 17 years earlier had been maintained faithfully and was available to represent me the moment I needed it. And a photograph. My grandfather and I are at the reservoir behind his house in Millbrook. I am 7 years old. He is 64. We are both wearing rubber boots, and neither of us is looking at the camera because we are looking at the water, and the whole image has the quality of a moment that did not know it was being recorded. I look at that photograph sometimes when I am studying or when the day has been long or when I miss him in the specific way you miss someone whose influence on your life is so foundational. You can never fully separate what they gave you from what you would have found on your own. I don't know all the things I would have found on my own. I know that I learned to pay attention because he taught me to. I know that I wrote a letter to a bank at 16 and mailed it from a post office because he had said something to me when I was 9 that I did not understand until I was 14 and held a bank statement with my name on it. I know that the attorney he had paid for in advance was ready for me when I needed him. He did not save me from what my parents are. He couldn't do that. Some things about a family are already decided by the time a child is old enough to notice them, and no amount of careful planning can reach backward and change them. But he could make sure that what they were did not become my ceiling. He could make sure that when the worst version of what he suspected came to pass, there was a wall and a second wall and a trust officer named Catherine Walsh sitting at a desk at midnight with everything ready. That is what he gave me. Not just money. Architecture. A structure built to withstand the specific weather of my particular life. I think about the people in your life who built things quietly, who made decisions in ordinary moments that were not ordinary at all, who loved you in the practical, patient, thorough way that does not always look like love until you need it, and it is there. Those people deserve to be seen. That is the whole reason I am telling this story. If it meant something to you, if it gave you hope or recognition or just a few minutes of feeling like the right things are sometimes protected, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. Check the description for more stories. I will see you in the